This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Lisa Ross, State Coordinator of SNAP Ed, and Jenny Ifft, K-State Agriculture Policy Specialist, start today's show with how the SNAP Ed program and Farm Bill relate. They also discuss how the nutrition program is utilized in Kansas. The show keeps going with Kelsey Andersen Onofre, K-State Wheat Pathology Specialist, and Romulo Lollato, K-State Wheat Production Specialist, as they review the 2023 Kansas Wheat Variety Guide. Historically, factors between 7 and 11 times the price of corn grain are used for pricing corn silage. However, K-State Dairy Specialist Mike Brouk completes the show by saying there are other factors that need to be considered. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Tuesday show, how we have been, with some information about the Farm Bill. And this week we're focusing in on how SNAP relates to the Farm Bill. And to join us to talk about that, we have State Coordinator of SNAP Ed, Lisa Ross, and K-State Agriculture Policy Specialist and Flinchbaugh Agricultural Policy Chair, Jenny Ifft. Jenny, Lisa, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Great to be here.
So, Jenny, first getting started with you, why are we talking about SNAP and the Farm Bill?
Well, there's two answers to that question. One is idealistic and one is practical. Let's start with the idealistic answer. What we call the Farm Bill really is a farm and food bill. And if you think about it, food systems are interconnected, so farm policies are going to affect the availability of cost in food. Our farm programs, the availability of food, could also affect even global stability. So, everything is interconnected. Why not have policies that work together? There is, however, a practical answer. Nutrition programs, literally food stamps, when food stamps were actual stamps, those began during the Great Depression based on shared policy objectives of increasing farm income and decreasing hunger in both rural and urban areas. A lot of farm families were hungry at that time as well. But then later on in the 60s and 70s, it really started being a partnership between hunger interests and broader hunger interests throughout the United States and legislators representing farm districts, that they could work together and they could put food and farm programs into a farm bill, and that was going to help get it passed and funded.
So, Lisa, why is SNAP Ed important to Kansas?
The SNAP Ed program helps decrease that hunger in Kansas and in food security. So in Kansas, we have nearly 10% of households experiencing food insecurity, which really means the lack of access to sufficient quantity of affordable, nutritious food. And so the effects of food security really can cause some health complications, especially when people are facing hunger and are forced to choose between buying food, paying bills, or maybe even skipping needed medications. So food security is really associated with chronic health problems in both adults and children, and it can include things like diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, obesity, and even mental issues. And when children are really exposed to hunger or food security, they have maybe scarce food resources and things like that. It can really affect their growth and development. And so SNAP Ed steps in to give some nutrition education on how to play with those things and make sure that they're getting the most bang for their buck when they do go use their SNAP or food assistance.
Jenny, kind of how are you seeing all this tie in together and really be a part of the Farm Bill and make an impact on SNAP Ed and producers?
Today, nutrition programs are the largest part of the Farm Bill, or as we should say, the Farm and Food Bill. So right now, nutrition programs are predicted to be 84% of the Farm Bill. Now, that seems like a large number, but what you have to keep in mind is over the past several decades, nutrition programs, food assistance, has become a major part of our social safety net. So for any family, any individual in the U.S. who is facing hunger that can't meet their basic needs, this is available. And one part of that is that it's a little bit more flexible than some of our other programs in our safety net. The program that used to be known as welfare, I think that's another acronym, TANF, but that one is a little bit less flexible, where if you fall into hard times or you fit into some categories, you can apply for SNAP.
Lisa, how does what your work do fit into the Farm Bill? How do you really see that impact take place?
The work that we do in SNAP Ed, we really play a critical role in helping people eligible for that SNAP benefit lead healthier lives on a limited budget. So we go in and do that nutrition education, and we try and teach people how to make their SNAP dollars stretch, and then how to shop for and cook healthy meals and stay physically active. So all those chronic diseases I just talked about, we're trying to eliminate those because they are on those limited resources. So we're trying to teach them how to use those to their benefit so that they get the most bang for their buck, in other words. And SNAP Ed not only does that nutrition education in communities across Kansas, but we initiate and support policy, system, and environmental work. And those are like change strategies, which are designed to promote healthy behaviors and making healthy choices readily available and easily accessible to the whole community. So we offer a bunch of solutions to address systemic conditions while creating an environment that's meaningful, long-term changes specifically tailored to the communities with the highest needs. So we're looking at our SNAP populations across Kansas and where we need to go into those communities and really build those up so they have healthy communities.
Who does this program reach?
Well, SNAP is a targeted program. Generally in policies there is some trade-offs, whether something is targeted or it's made widely available, and SNAP is targeted. So there are careful steps that are taken to make sure that individuals or families are eligible for the program. SNAP is designed to meet the needs of people who truly are facing hunger. Because there is an application process and you have to take that extra step, currently, today, not even half of the people that are eligible participate. But SNAP still does reach, in recent years, over 50 million people, over 20 million families. And if you look at who participates in SNAP, you can get up to, I think, 43% are children. Then you have a large share that are elderly or disabled or families with children. That'll get you up to about 90% of the participants. That last 10%, there's a special term for it, able-bodied without dependents. So these are people without a family who are able-bodied, and they have some extra requirements to be eligible. But a lot of the policy debates are around those 10% that fall within that category, while the vast majority, again, are elderly or children.
And so what is the nutrition programs looking like in the current Farm Bill?
I think, first of all, to put it in perspective, there is a broad consensus amongst groups that represent agricultural production or producers and nutrition interests that these two need to work together to pass a farm bill. So sometimes there's efforts, let's separate these, but ultimately to make this work today, and this is sort of the practical perspective, everybody has to work together. We all work in an interconnected food system. So that's the consensus. So I think there's two parts of the political debate that are interesting right now. So one part is the budget for both farm and food programs increased over the past 5 years, but nutrition increased more. So that's coming up in the current debate. The other part of it, and now this is kind of getting to some of the policy minutia, but it's an important part of the debate that's going on. The budget for SNAP, it's called the Thrifty Food Plan. The budget for SNAP participants increased over the past 5 years, and that was done administratively by the USDA. Now, I know a lot of families have had sticker shock the past couple years at the grocery store. If you're already stretched tight, you might want to increase the SNAP budget. So that's why that happened, but the USDA did it instead of Congress. So, there's this debate. Who gets to make those changes and when? That's a part of the current Farm Bill debate as well.
And we were talking a lot about SNAP Ed here. Who benefits from SNAP and other programs associated with it?
SNAP Ed really supports SNAP-eligible individuals, specifically SNAP participants, and then other individuals like we were talking about who experience poverty across the lifespan. So we're talking children through, elderly people who qualify to receive SNAP benefits. And here in Kansas, our SNAP report as of June of 2023, in Kansas, we had 94,457 households receive SNAP benefits, with almost 190,000 really total persons receiving SNAP, and 106,000 of those were adults, and 83,000 approximately were children. So our programs in Kansas are across 65 counties across the state, and you can really see us in both rural and urban areas, and in the places where we try and get in the places where they live, learn, eat, and play, and we serve adults and senior populations as well as those youth. So, and in SNAP Ed, we work with grades 3 to 12, but we really try and get those high need areas and work with the entire lifespan, because everybody can qualify for SNAP, and it's not only just those with families or those that are, our older adults, but it's across the entire lifespan.
And as we round out today's conversation, is there anything you would like to tell ag producers when it comes to nutrition programs and the Farm Bill?
Well, I think, today these interests really need to work together, and I think it makes a lot of sense for us to sit down at the table and talk about these shared problems.
I would agree, and especially for SNAP Ed, because SNAP accounts, like you said, for about 84% of the Farm Bill, and SNAP Ed is administered by our SNAP agency, and here in Kansas, that's Department for Children and Families. But that's how we get our money to go out into these communities and really be able to teach our families and our senior adults on how to use their SNAP dollars well, and so that they can have healthy, wholesome meals and have food security so that they don't feel hungry and they don't have to send their kids to school hungry and all of those types of things. So it's really important that we work together, because without SNAP, there's no SNAP education.
Lisa, if people are wanting to find out more information about SNAP or SNAP Ed, where could they do that?
They can do that on our Kansas SNAP Ed website, which is www.k-state.edu.
That was State Coordinator for SNAP Ed, Lisa Ross, and K-State Agricultural Policy Specialist and Flinchball Agricultural Policy Chair, Jenny Ifft. I'll link the SNAP website in today's show notes, which you can find on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be back with more ahead. You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and we now want to discuss a recent guide that's come out from Kansas State University, the Kansas Wheat Variety Guide for 2023. And to talk about it today, we have K-State Wheat Pathologist Specialist Kelsey Andersen Onofre and K-State Wheat Production Specialist Romulo Lollato. Kelsey, Romulo, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks, Shelby.
So, Kelsey, getting started with you here, can you just tell us a little bit about what is this guide?
So this is something we put together every year annually. So we try really hard to get this published as close to harvest as we can, as soon as we can get the data synthesized from the previous season. And really, this is a guide that has lots of information about disease ratings for our most popular varieties here in Kansas. We also have agronomic ratings. Romulo's on. He can talk a little bit more about some of those summaries. And we have some information about insect reactions, mainly Hessian fly, in this guide. So if you've probably seen this guide, it's been published for more than 30 years here in Kansas, but it was formerly named the Insect and Disease Rating Guide. And we did change that in 2022 just to reflect what's actually in the guide, because this really does have a lot of additional commentary, outside of those disease and insect ratings.
And Shelby, I guess our main objective with these publications is really to help guide producers in selecting the next variety that they will plant next year, right? And so there is just so many varieties available today out there from different companies, from different public and private enterprises there, that it's kind of hard for growers to filter through them, right? So here is one tool on the toolbox where we try to put out our understanding of these varieties and how they are faring according to the data that we've been collecting. Now, important to mention that this is separate from the official K-State variety performance trials, right? And they complement each other. We always tell growers that, they need to look at as many sources as they can to make a decision. One source is the K-State variety performance tests. Those results are online currently. They're not published yet, but they are available online, and growers can check them. And that gives the yield performance of those varieties, yield, test weight, and sometimes protein. Now, here in this MF 991, we are actually expanding into each variety in their agronomic and disease characteristics and which cropping systems they fit better, strengths and weaknesses. So really a complementary way for growers to make variety selections.
What really is that process of collecting everything?
Yeah, so this is a kind of document that summarizes multiple years of data from this region, right? So we don't, for example, publish just disease ratings that have been published by companies. We go out and we independently verify, for example, rust resistance ratings or maturity, some of our virus ratings, where we've seen that in multiple observations in Kansas with, the isolates of the pathogens that are relevant here and also the agronomic conditions that are relevant here. And, to put these ratings in this document, sometimes we are maybe a year behind or 2 years behind when a variety is actually released because we just need a couple of years to actually get that Kansas data into the document here and make sure we have a good amount of confidence behind those numbers, right? I will mention that sometimes they do change, right? So we do have shifts in our rust races, for example, right? Sometimes our races evolve. And so these ratings, they can change from year to year and we do update it pretty frequently. So if you have a favorite variety, you've grown it for several years, you're comfortable with it, it's not a bad idea to go in and just double check what the current ratings are so you can kind of plan your management accordingly. So when you're actually going through the document, you'll notice, a few things. We've got some information in the front, just generally about variety selection in our region. And then you'll come to these sections where we actually have variety profiles. And this is really, if you've actually come out to Wheat Plot Tour and you've seen Romulo and I and our colleagues here at K-State or others talking about varieties, this has a lot of the more general commentary and also those disease reactions on some of the top varieties in the state and some newer varieties. So for example, this year we've added to that profile section KS Territory, a new K-State variety, KS Providence, another newer K-State variety, Strad's CL Plus, which is a variety out of the Oklahoma State breeding program, and also the variety AP Bigfoot. So that's an AgriPro variety that was released within the last couple of years. So you'll notice that we try to get newer varieties in there as quickly as we can. If you kind of scroll to the back of the document, and I think people use this table pretty frequently, you'll find the appendices, which have, over 70 varieties kind of in a table form that give you all of the disease ratings for all the major diseases, and also those insect reactions and some of those agronomic ratings. And that's much more comprehensive. I think we added 10 new varieties to that end table. We pull out some older varieties, but we try to keep a few historical checks in there. You'll notice Jagger and Jagaline are still in there, and that's kind of just to benchmark some of our ratings with varieties that have been familiar in the past.
And Kelsey mentioned that it may take a year or two until we put any information from new varieties here. And I always like to mention to growers that these ratings that we take, they are opportunistic, right? So we're trying to see these varieties as many times as we can throughout the year. And so if you have been to a wheat plot tour, either in a demonstration plot or in an official location where variety trials are conducted, you might see that before the tour or after the tour, Kelsey and myself and Eric the Wolf, we're kind of like looking for things out there. And these are the opportunistic things that we're trying to find. These last couple of years, I had the chance to do a lot of drought tolerance ratings, right? So maybe we had some updated drought tolerance ratings here. And unfortunately, Kelsey didn't have the chance to do too much in terms of diseases out in the state. But she does have nurseries here in Manhattan where she updates a lot of this information from there. So again, very opportunistic type of ratings. And we want to see a variety in a given trait for a given variety many, many times before we actually put it out there. And the decisions that we make in terms of removing a variety or adding a new variety, there's always a lot of mental wrestling that goes on before we can make a decision like that. Right, because there's just so many varieties that are out there, and sometimes you come across a variety that is quite old already, and then we say, well, we should probably take it out. But then we hear about many growers still growing it, and well, that's a hard decision. Okay, let's keep this one, even though it's old. It might serve a good purpose in terms of growers who have it today and maybe considering changing from that variety. They can actually use these to look back and see how a new variety compares to something they are growing today.
And Kelsey, you mentioned the agronomic characteristics, which, Romulo, is really something it sounds like you spend your time working on. And so what is that showing producers?
Yeah, that's a good question. So on the agronomic side, that's something that we added after I got on board here in K-State. So I think that the first year that we actually added to this document was back in 2016 or 2017. One of those years we added agronomic ratings to this publication. And that's more like a maturity, for example. So how does one variety relate to the others, compared to the others in terms of maturity? And this is not necessarily only heading dates, right? Because, again, as I mentioned before, these are opportunistic ratings. If we get to a trial and the earliest maturing variety might be already getting to a late soft dough stage, and the latest maturing variety might still be in those, grain elongation stages, well, that's the maturity that we will take. It's not necessarily heading date. It's more of a general maturity note, considering that entire grain filling period. We also look at plant height, and plant height is very important, both under well-watered conditions or under drought conditions as well, but especially for growers who are interested either in managing lodging. They might go for more, perhaps a shorter type of variety, or out in the West, growers who are interested in a considerable amount of residue being left behind, right? Because that's actually going to save some moisture and help control weeds for the next summer crop. And so height is something that we looked at as well. Drought tolerance, again, some years like 2019, we don't take a single note on drought tolerance, but then we have 2 years in a row when we that's all that we're taking. And finally, we also have straw strength, like so standability. Sometimes these can be correlated to height, but they're not necessarily correlated to height. So it's important to put both, because some growers may be looking for a variety that is tall, but then again, they also want a good standability on that variety. And so, again, opportunistic ratings, whenever we get to a demonstration plot that has lodging going on, we will rate that from a 1 to 9 scale. 1, something that is standing upright, and 9, something that is laying flat on the ground, right? So these are the agronomic ratings that we have on top of many of the different diseases that Kelsey and Eric DeWolf spend a lot of their time measuring out in the field.
And this Kansas Wheat Variety Guide for 2023 is 20 pages filled with information for producers. And so where can they find this?
Yeah, so the easiest place is to go to the K-State bookstore online, the KSRE bookstore. We'll publish in the Agronomy e-update the link to this as well. Or you can just reach out to your local extension office, and they can definitely get you a copy of this document.
During social media, absolutely make sure and give a follow to Kelsey and I there. Myself is KSU Wheat, and Kelsey, I believe, is KSU Wheat Diseases. And so you can just give us a follow, and we're putting that information out on social media as well, either Twitter or Facebook or Instagram and other social media platforms as well.
That was K-State Wheat Production Specialist Romulo Lollato and K-State Wheat Pathologist Specialist Kelsey Andersen Onofre. I will link today's resources that we talked about in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. We end today's program with this week's milk lines. Producers purchasing corn silage may run into difficulty calculating the price. Historically, factors somewhere between 7 and 11 times the price of corn grain are used for pricing corn silage. While that's one way to set a price, K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk says there are a number of other considerations that should be taken into account to determine a fair price for corn silage.
Today I'd like to visit with our Kansas dairy producers concerning pricing the corn silage for 2023. As we look at purchasing corn silage from our neighbors and we look at the price of corn that we're currently seeing in the marketplace, it may cause you some concern as you think about what corn silage may be worth as you purchase it for your dairy. Many times we use factors somewhere between 7 and 11 times the price of corn grain to determine what the value of corn silage might be. While these are good thumb rules, and again, like I say, often used, it's really concerning because a lot of times we don't define what that factor should be. Do we use 7? Do we use 10? Do we use 11 times the price of corn? How do we actually decide what that factor should be? Well, a couple of things I want you to consider is the fact that generally if we're using the factor of 10 or 11 times the bushel price of corn, and right now corn is about $6 a bushel, so that would be between $60 and $66 per ton, that would be your cost placed into a bunker or placed into a pile. As we think about that, a lot of times we're going out and we're actually purchasing corn that's standing in the field. So the dairy farm is responsible for the harvesting, the trucking, the packing, as well as any losses of dry matter that might occur during the fermentation process. We would normally expect some losses due to spoilage during storage as well, but probably for the pricing of the crop, we should be concerned about those losses that occur during fermentation, just so we recognize that it is a true cost of our feedstuff. So as you start to think about those things, what is it going to cost to harvest, haul, pack, and cover your corn silage? I think if you check around with your custom operators, again, the prices will vary depending on how much silage you're putting up and some discounts that might be associated with that. But I think this year a good average price might be about $15 a ton for those items. In addition, we'd also have some shrink, and minimal shrink due to the fermentation process is about 8%, so that maybe add another $5 a ton. So now when you think about this, you might want to take that, say, $66 a ton minus your harvesting, hauling, and packing as well as covering costs. So minus, say, $15 minus the shrink, which would say about $6. So now we have a price that we might consider for the standing crop. Now, will this be agreeable to the person that actually owns that standing crop? Well, another way to think about it as you have the discussion is, what is the grain yield of the corn that you're buying? Take that into consideration and the value of the grain yield per acre divided by the tons of silage that you expect to get. Higher yields of grain will generally yield higher tons of corn silage per acre, so make sure you take that into consideration. 100 bushel corn might result in about 18 tons of silage per acre, harvested at about 35% dry matter. As you have less grain in the crop, there will be less tons, and sometimes under drought conditions, we can get down to less than 8 tons of harvested material per acre. Take that into consideration as you're trying to decide what the value of that crop might be. Also, make sure that if you're basing it on the value of the grain, there is a harvesting cost associated with actually getting that grain out of the field. So make sure you deduct that from it as well, since you as a dairy farmer would be paying the harvesting cost if you buy that as silage. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging our dairy farmers to consider the many factors that are associated with the true value of corn silage.
Thanks, Mike. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.